Hi, Melissa.
Hey, Nikki.
Welcome to Checkbox Other, my friend.
I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, me too. So, for those of you who have listened to the podcast before, you've heard me say this, but we started the conversation before we started recording, and all this amazing stuff comes up, and I'm like, hold on. We got to start recording. So, the first thing that I'm going to have Melissa do is take you through a quick Cliff Notes version of her journey that led her to where she is now. Any kind of pivots, aha moments, any big stuff that's come up in your journey, Melissa, to make you who you are today.
Yeah, so I was born psych. No. Um, um, you know, I grew up in Philadelphia, and my mother thought education was really important. And so she put myself and my brother in private school through elementary school. And when I got to middle school, I went to my neighborhood public middle school. And I realized that my middle school experience wasn't what my mother thought it would be.
Mm,
And so there was so much that was lacking. We encounter a lot of neglect from school staff, violence, all the things that, 12, 13, 14-year-olds could get into and could go
mm,
wrong happened in my middle school. And I remember being in 8th grade, and this is when you apply for high school, and we all filled out the same form to apply for high schools.
mm,
But one day, a counselor who I had not known, I wouldn't be able to recognize that person today, but they called me to their office and said, Melissa, because of your grades and your attendance, you can apply to these schools. And they pulled out another application form.
oh,
And that application form was for our magnet high schools in Philadelphia. And I chose to apply to 3 of them. I was admitted to all 3, and I chose to go to creative and performing arts. And so that's where I really kind of started my path to becoming a writer. But once I got to creative and performing arts, or we call it CAPA, I realized that education does not have to look the way it looked in my middle school. And I remember thinking that the narrative in this big city, is that we didn't have the resources or we didn't have the money to do it right. And I end up in a public school in the city where we were nurtured, we were cared for, our student to teacher ratio was really low. And we got to explore all these great things. And so my particular art form was writing. So fast forward as I go through my college journey, one of the things that always bothered me was knowing how easily writing came to me, but also how formulaic it can be and the power you have when you're able to write and you're able to tell your story and articulate the things, the desires of your heart, right? And so I knew that there was a lot of power there,
mm,
but a lot of my classmates, young children that I was working with, because I ended up working in education my senior year of high school, those were things, writing didn't come easy to them and they were intimidated by it. And so as I continued to go through undergrad and eventually I get to my graduate program in urban education, and now I have a really strong focus on writing. How do we get young people to become better writers and to own their own stories and their narratives and be able to shift, what other folks might think of them? And so when I was in graduate school, I had started working at a nonprofit organization, and I'm testing out these writing things. The short story is, between graduate school and the formal founding of Capture Greatness as an organization, I had gone through 2 layoffs
mhm.
at that time and would face a 3rd layoff after graduate school. And what I wanted to do most, though, I knew I had a calling. I thought I was a really talented writer, but
Yeah.
I knew I had a calling for teaching writing. And so when I was up against my layoff as a college coordinator, that was a piece of my work that I didn't want to let go. I knew that I made good connections with students, and I knew that I had found this particular niche, and it was helping students write for college admission and for scholarships.
Mm.
And immediately I could see the impact of that writing. You know, if they wrote a great essay and applied for some scholarships, that was thousands of dollars that would come to a student, to help them pursue, you know, a college education, pursue the things that they really wanted to do in the world. And so the most abbreviated version is, I'm a girl who'd always been a writer, who faced a number of layoffs and made a commitment to students who were like me, you know, in Philadelphia, that we could use the power of our own stories to literally fund our futures. And so that's what I'm doing through Capture Greatness.
Oh, well, again, I will say this, but I apologize to the listeners. You've heard me say this before. When there's something that is like so true and beautiful, I get chills through my whole body, and I'm freezing right now. Your story, and just even like the journey, I feel like I just watched a bit of a movie in the way you just said that, and the kind of ups and downs, but also the that idea of your writer's journey becoming both a writer's journey and a teacher's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so beautiful. And I think something that so many of us feel some sort of pull one way or another to share the things we've learned, but not necessarily knowing how. And especially that whole piece that you were just mentioning of knowing how by looking to who you were and how you could have helped who you were when you were younger, or those around you, is just, it's so powerful. And I think especially in a place of layoffs, specifically of transition and change that's outside of your control, to be able to focus in such a way that allows you to continue to move forward and remain hopeful. And again, I mean, the name is so perfect, to capture the greatness that's around you, is just incredibly powerful. And I think is the thing that was so chill inducing. It's like, you know, there's a lot of us, especially, I mean, before we hopped on, where we were talking about the coronavirus, which is completely out of our control, unexpected. The world feels like it's in upheaval, and there are so many people reacting to that lack of control and that struggle with freaking out, with, you know, lighting their hair on fire kind of feeling. And to be able to kind of take that when it's in your own personal life one way or another and say, okay, here's a bump, I've got to figure out how to navigate that. Here's a different bump, I'm going to figure out how to navigate that. And to be able to be so reflective in the journey too is just incredibly powerful. So first of all, thank you for the wonderful journey you just laid out. And we're going to learn more, so I'm so excited. The name of this podcast is Checkbox Other. And so one of the questions I ask up front is for guests to share about a time or two in their lives, because sometimes it feels too limiting to do one, but feel free to do as many as you'd like, that they have felt other, or as though they didn't belong. I know I heard a little bit of that in the story you told, but if there's any stories of other that stand out to you, I'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, so Nikki, you know, I felt other in so many instances in my life, and I've come to embrace that now. Mm-hmm. I would say, as it relates to the work I'm doing, I really felt other in that work because, you know, we were being paid through a government grant. So I used to work through this initiative called Student Success Centers. And so we had Student Success Centers in multiple high schools in the city, and it was grant funded. And my role was a college coordinator, my role was the college coordinator. So I helped school staff get their students to college. And so a big portion of my work was also helping students gain access to federal and state aid to be able to pay for college, which is where I found that even though I was helping students get access to this money, two things concerned me. One was that every time we complete a FAFSA, I know that that's $5,500 right there. And then if their parents take out Parent Plus loans, that's even more thousands of dollars of debt that they are now being opened up to. And the other challenge was when I looked at how much even our state schools cost in Pennsylvania. And a lot of people don't know Pennsylvania has, Pennsylvania graduates students from college with the highest amount of debt in the nation. Yeah. And so
I did not know that.
Right. So the challenge is that our state has not caught up in terms of state funding going to our public colleges in the state. And so the gap has now fallen on students and parents. So it's really costly to get through even our public colleges. So those two things became an issue for me. And I remember going to, staff meetings and with folks around the city. And I said, well, we have benchmarks for how many students we're supposed to sign up for FAFSA. We have benchmarks for how many students we're supposed to ensure have applied to college. We have benchmarks for how many students we take on, college tours. But who's responsible for the scholarship dollars, right? Like their scholarship money to help our students get to college. I am helping students and parents complete FAFSAs, and people are coming in with incomes of $19,000 to support 4 people in a household. And so I couldn't understand why we all were okay with knowing that we're opening these young people up to thousands of dollars in debt. Their households don't even have $1,000 in a savings account, like an emergency account.
Right.
And so, and no one was saying anything. And so I remember, asking my supervisor, again, it was federally funded. And, he just was like, well, this is the initiative. This was under the Obama administration. This is the initiative. This is what we have to do. And I remember saying, like, have you ever heard of a wide scale public initiative that actually, really helped low income and minority people, right? So all those things don't always come together like that. And so that's when I realized I would have to own the scholarship piece. And still in Philadelphia, there isn't another organization that is specifically focused on helping Philadelphia area students get scholarships for college, because everyone says that it's the responsibility of the student or the parent.
Oh, so it's so funny. In hearing your story of other, it's one of those things that I talk to people and I'm like, if you can't find your other, think about a time when somebody reacted or responded to something you asked or challenged with, well, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Because to me, that is, I always tell people, I'm like, if you're going to say that to me, just be prepared. Cause that's like my favorite thing for someone to say back to me. Cause I'm like a little kid that asks why 20 times after that. So, exactly. Right. So if you're going to come to me and say, oh, well, you know what? Yeah, we understand that this is going to be putting people $5,500 in the hole just to start. Mm-hmm. And yeah, don't worry about that. The fact that it's 25% of their income.
Right.
Just for themselves alone, not to mention the rest of their family, but that's just the way things work. Mm-hmm. And then everybody goes, oh, okay, that's the way things work. We've got to work around that. I'm always like, no. Let's ask why a whole bunch more times, because a lot of times those whys, when you ask them, they start to show that there are all these systems and structures in place that are benefiting from that 5,500. That do they need that? Do we need to be going this way? Can we forego this experience altogether and create another option? And again, yes, is that pushing against the current? Yeah. But is there so much opportunity behind that? Wait, hold on. What if we just charted a new path over here? So I love that. So here's, I guess my question is, what was the reaction of, it sounds like you were kind of starting this organization based on the lack of opportunity within the organization you're working in. So it sounds like you were like, I'm noticing a need. I'm going to advocate as best I can within the organization I have. And then, where the barriers are, I'll create this myself because we don't have the capacity within this organization. Is that?
Well, no. So the funny thing is, I did start in my role and in an organization, and I started something that I call scholarship clubs. And so,
Ooh.
I had my seniors come down in the afternoons, and that was specifically timed. So so you know how you get a job description and then it's like other duties as assigned. So no one.
You're like, oh, so that was just like an intro to what this would be. There's a whole nother job behind this. Cool.
Right. So in my case, I made my other duties, right? Like they weren't mandated by someone else, but other duties for me, and also my identity as a writer is, you know what? If helping you get money for college means you have to write an essay, I can teach you how to do that. And so that's where Scholarship Club, came in. And I had students meeting consistently every week because there are scholarship deadlines, all throughout their senior year. And also I learned in the work that while it's really hard to fund a student's education through some of our public colleges and universities, because they don't have the money to be able to offer in scholarships. If I could convince my students to apply for more competitive schools and they get in, a lot of the private schools had more scholarship dollars for them. And at the time, students, and still now, a lot of students were applying to college and being admitted without having to write an essay at all. And so if they don't even have to write a personal statement, it is highly unlikely I can convince them to write essays for scholarships. But if I could get them to just write a personal statement, right, oftentimes that could double for scholarship essays. Or through the way that I was teaching them about, writing their own narrative, they felt so much pride in what they were writing. They were interested in writing another essay about themselves. And so that scholarship process. So, right. So scholarship clubs is something that was started, but I didn't really have an intention to start Capture Greatness as an organization. At the time when I went through B-school programming, I was really interested in helping educators navigate the classroom and like student issues and those things. And so when I started off as an entrepreneur, I started under my own name, and I thought that I would be working more with my peers. But then the school in Philadelphia that year, they closed 23 public schools.
Wow.
Just like that, so they announced it, I think in December or January or something like that. And by the end of the school year, these schools were closed. And I was also, my student success center was at Germantown High School. And it was one of the schools that was closed down. And I was like, oh, wow, we have a much bigger issue and task at hand. And so because I was laid off again, and I knew how layoffs worked, and I didn't know, where my next job would be, I started contacting the schools where most of the juniors, the rising seniors, would have gone to finish out their senior year. And I got in contact with counselors and principals, and I said, hey, I had been working with them through the Student Success Center. They were looking forward to working with me on their college applications and scholarships the next year. Will you allow me to come into the school and work with, the former Germantown students? And if you have other students at your school who will want to participate, I'm happy to do it. And that was a volunteer effort. And what happened, again, the narrative around Philadelphia schools is that when I would come in and do a workshop, the adult who was in the room would come to me afterwards, and they would say, Melissa, that was really good. You know, we had money in the budget for this.
Mm.
And I did not know that because,
Do you
right?
now?
I did not know. And so I didn't realize that even our public schools have different sources of funding, and some schools had 21st century grant money and some, you know, and so that's where I realized I could do exactly what I had been so passionate about. And there was money that exists in the city, you know, for this type of work. And when people saw the work, they appreciated it. It was not being done in the city. And that's how Capture Greatness went from a workshop. It was like a workshop series that I titled Capture Greatness. And my good friend Michelle was looking at it and she said, you know what, that's what you should name your organization. And so that's how we switched from Capture Greatness being a workshop to the organization that offers, you know, writing or narrative writing workshops and more scholarship and college coaching support now.
That's incredible. So I know, so you mentioned B School, and for those of you, I mean, if you listen to this podcast, you've heard me mention it. But you mentioned you started B School to do a kind of a different focus initially. And so how did that, I mean, you just mentioned how the kind of pivot came about. How did you kind of reframe, even just, it sounds like your audience is going to be different. If it was initially educators and kind of training the trainer, to then being like boots on the ground, let's hang out, you know, let's get these stories out in the world. How did one, that mentality shift? And then also what was surprising about having that opportunity to kind of be the person with all these students and hearing all their stories?
What was surprising? Well, I think my focus shifted naturally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I knew the layoff was coming. And so I would be at work sometimes, like in my cubicle. So we couldn't see students until their lunch period.
Oh.
And so I remember I would go to work, right? And I would be like trying to work on my B School modules in the first hour and a half where students weren't allowed into the Student Success Center. And so it's like there is this issue, right? This problem that is pending and it's very present.
Yeah.
And then I'm working on, you know, building content. And so the easiest thing when we learn about, you know, building a newsletter, in my mind, the way that I could apply what I was learning through B School made so much sense because I knew how I coach students through senior year from September, you know, through June. And I knew what I would like to say to students the summer before senior year to help them become more competitive college candidates. And so B School launches in March, right? And so what I started to do was think, okay, I can still support the students who have come to know and trust me. All I need to do is, instead of writing content to educators every week, so I sent out a blog article every week for that next year because my goal was to walk those juniors who will then be seniors through their senior year. So I wrote an article on my website and had an email list. And so that way I became a resource, right, in the city. Like this is what we can do. Because remember this, I don't think I said this, the Student Success Center grant was ending too. So even for the schools, right, who stayed open, the high schools that stayed open in Philadelphia, if they had a Student Success Center, it had gone away because the federal funding was stopping for that. And then we had 23 not high schools, but 23 public schools closed. So there was a lot that happened that year. And there was a lot of high school students without any support when it came to college. And that meant it was a lot of families like, you know, where do we turn to?
Right.
And that made sense. So that's how I did that. And how did it feel being that person? It felt really good. I knew that I was contributing a lot. So much so, it built my confidence to the level where I started writing articles for our local it's called Philadelphia Public School Notebook. And so it's a newspaper dedicated to Philadelphia public schools.
Wow.
And so I started a column there to help more folks. And that's where I think my peers really started to recognize the work that I was doing. That's where I was able to get more opportunities, able to lead some trainings around college access and college success. And so that's how that panned out for me.
Well, it's so weird. I'm like, I'm grateful for the, for the closings to be bringing you to the world of, for all these, I don't know, it sounds weird to say, but again, it's one of those things that's like the universe works in mysterious ways, and your gifts get to show sometimes when you least expect them. So yeah, that's amazing. So, here's one of the questions that I feel like anybody that is thinking about college, has kids that are going into college, went to college and still has to pay their student loans all the time. Just any kind of thought around kind of the higher education systems that we've got in America. There's a lot of conversation at the presidential level now around student debt forgiveness, public options for schools. Obviously, what we're talking about here is the kind of barrier to entry that the financial burden brings when, we we're talking about those $5,500. That wasn't even about getting into school. It was just so once you're there, once you've gotten that acceptance, how do you view the conversations that are happening on a federal level around this stuff as you're seeing it from, much earlier and trying to get people prepared to come in? How do you feel like those policies will shift things? And is there another opportunity, as we're talking about this on such a high level, to really think about this differently that can help cushion the financial blow or the financial burden that's coming around this entire process?
Oh.
And it's a really light question, I know.
Oh, so light. I'll just answer with yes. No, like no.
You're like, yep, it's a lot. And next question.
So, of course, I give a lot of thought to what some of, now we don't even have these people as options, right? For some of the folks who propose some more comprehensive plans around the cost of college education in particular. I'll say right now, and oh wow, okay, so one of the things that I'm glad to see, but I still want people to understand that college is both an educational and an economic decision. And so what we've just seen Trump do this week is propose federal student loan repayments without the interest, right? So basically subsidizing interest payments on our student loans, which I think will help folks, because a lot, depending on what your debt load is, the interest on a student loan can be hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
And so, most of us, we find ourselves in such a difficult spot trying to get ahead, right? It's like you were told that you have to go to college to get access to jobs or career fields where you could make an income that can bring you some real quality of life and help to support your family. And so what we've been doing in the past is going after this like any means necessary. Like, we'll just take out all the loans that's required to get through. And if this was a longer conversation, we can talk about how colleges and how they all work towards this system of indebting us in that process. So I think that it's important that people pay attention to the fact that even though he's the president, and according to Senator Warren, there is a clause that says that the government can do whatever they want with federal loans, student loans.
Mm-hmm.
I am paying attention to the fact that he's not decreasing that. He's not decreasing the burden in
Right.
terms of the principal, but only taking care of the interest. And so that's been one of the biggest challenges, is the fact that it doesn't seem like our federal government at this point is looking at how to really help folks. The other thing about making public colleges free, I am so skeptical of the word free in America. America was built on capitalism, and so I know that it's not really free. We're paying for it one way or another. It could be through increase of taxes. I'm not sure what that looks like, but for these institutions to continue to run the way they do, they're going to have to find funding somewhere
Right.
for free public education. And so let's say that we look forward 5 years from now and we have free public colleges. I think given that we are still under capitalism, you're going to see more students trying to access private colleges. So I think that there's going to be more of a tiered system, whereas if you go to a public college, I think the narrative is going to shift. Like, well, if you go to a public college or university and that's free, so anyone can go. But a private school is going to be worth, taking out the additional debt, because it's the same way that, we're sold Ivy League dreams and all of those things, right?
Yes.
It's the network, it's the alumni. So I think that we'll definitely see that happen. And there's going to be a limit. And so with the student populations that I work with, we often talk about a bachelor's degree as a 4-year degree, but what we know is that so many students experience so much, right, during the course of a college education, that it will probably take, first of all, the average is actually 4.5 to 5 years for people completing a bachelor's degree. So I guess questions I would have is, how long would the education be free? What are the stipulations? What's your grade point average? Does it account for things that are out of your control, like a death in the family? Can someone pause their education and come back? What are all of these things looking like? And then will there be any kind of oversight when it comes to what private schools and institutions can do to market to them? So, for instance, when I was working through the Student Success Center at Germantown High School, we had some of the private schools come in and put on really fancy demonstrations and get a lot of students to sign up. Now, most of those schools are out of business, right? Because the federal government said, okay, you guys are actually predatory and you're not producing the degrees, or you're charging way too much. And so we know the government has power, but I think there needs to be some oversight when it comes to what this rollout plan looks like and who actually has access and what's going to be required of someone to actually get access to a free public college or education. But then I also want to say that I went to college, right? And I went to graduate school, but I have a younger brother. And it was really clear to me and my mother when he was coming up that he did not need to take college as his initial path out of high school. He needed a trade, And so he got a trade. He started working. He's never been without work. He has much less debt than me. And, he works at a company where if he wants to go back to school, they would offset the cost of that depending on what he majored in. So I also don't want people to feel like if they don't get their child directly, into college at 18 when they have no idea what they want to be anyway, right?
Yes.
It's not the end of the world. So let's really think about this as educational and economic decision so that we are healthy mentally, emotionally, on and on, because these young people are going to become adults who are going to experience all types of adversity and more challenges, more stress. I feel sorry for folks who are heavily indebted when it comes to their college education, because it really messes with your quality of life years after college.
Right. And generations, right? Generation after generation, right?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is perfect, because a perfect segue into what my next question was going to be was just around this. I need to acknowledge that I love, because I feel like you just had another moment of, well, you told me that's the way it is, but really we don't all have to go to college. we could do other things too. So part of that question comes up. I mean, obviously we are right now in the middle of the impacts of the early stages of coronavirus isolation and social distancing, and what that looks like from an educational perspective. From very, very young through college of, I've got my two brothers are in school right now and they were both sent home. How do you think about, well, I have this feeling that this is something that will give us a whole bunch of, it gives us a peek into the opportunities that we never really would have been able to see if we just tried to move them slowly. So, being in this social distanced, isolated, virtual atmosphere shows us the opportunity to really make certain things more flexible than we've been told in the past that they have to be.
Right.
So it's my very nice way of dancing around how I feel about it. But, I think there is this piece of education in itself, the fact that there are so many opportunities for kids to consume information. And I say kids very loosely because, I feel like a kid sometimes. I'm learning stuff from Netflix every day. Right. How do you kind of think about the evolution? You and I, when we met in person in New York, there was a little bit of talk about this. But just how do you see the evolution of education as we have so much more information at our fingertips, as the younger generations pretty much were born with the internet on their thumbs at I watch little kids, they know how to use iPads before they can walk. How do you think about the evolution of education as we have so much information virtually?
So I think one of the reasons why this is even an option, right, for all of these colleges and universities to shut down campus and say, go to your computer, right?
Yeah.
Do it from home, wherever home is because we've already been seeing this shift, right? Yeah. We know that you don't have to physically gather in one place to really learn something, but I think I'm going to say a number of things to this. One is experiences, they are what evokes emotion. And so we can better retain knowledge and information based on the emotions that we have around it. And I don't think that you can cut human connection out of that. So as excited as I might be about getting the answer to a question correct, from my office or whatever, it's not the same as having a good friend or your study buddy just pat you on the back and so I feel like, especially in our formative years when we're talking about learning and socializing, because while we can do more things from home, if you're in the classroom, if you're working with young people, the biggest challenge is that they're connected to those devices that you said it was born on their thumbs, and they are disconnected from people. And so we've already been seeing a challenge, right, with them in these devices that it seemed like they came out the womb with, because we didn't have them when we were born. Right. We went outside and we played with one another. We didn't jump on Snapchat or whatever.
Thank goodness for that.
Okay. We know things that we have to physically move our bodies. That was our play in our games. And we know that this generation they're experiencing some things that we haven't. I read somewhere that there are different forms of carpal tunnel happening now to much younger people because of texting and how you text primarily with your thumb. So anyhow, so there's that. The other thing that I want to throw into this particular discussion, though, is the privilege that we have, right? And so there are a lot of assumptions being made about who has adequate technology at home, who has the resources to keep the internet going, right? And so even if a student has an iPhone, you know you can get access to the internet on a college campus. But when you get home, that might not have been a high priority bill, you know what I mean, or utility at home. And so we're talking about something that's very different. And I think that we often forget. And especially when it comes to children, you know, now the federal government, because our public schools are closed, they are telling cities, you know, that need it most for students who are showing up to school primarily to make sure that they eat, you know, once or twice a day. Here's where you can send the children now to so that their food isn't disrupted. But I think of so many students who have come from households that's just not really conducive to learning, where right now they're probably trying to do some schoolwork and there's 5 other people in the room with them. And so I think there's a place for virtual and distance learning, but there's always a need for human connection, for creating safe havens for students, for, you know, being able to develop and support environments that are good for learning. I know students who will come to school 7 in the morning and not leave until 7 in the evening. And it's because they really needed those other caring adults. You know, by making things virtual, we're neglecting young people in so many ways. And so I do hope to see that more of, that we get back to normal sooner than later. And even for college students, you know, what's a virtual spring break?
Right. I can tell you my brother was pissed. So, you know, it's so interesting because I find these I get excited around even just bringing conversations to what matters. So as you're saying all these incredible points that we need to focus on, right? And those are the things that matter. But a lot of times when, especially when the discourse is happening on social media, it becomes about, I'm going to say toilet paper because I feel like everyone's talking about toilet paper, but it's like, toilet paper, sure. You bring up, I mean, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like baseline stuff. There are so many people that rely on their routine that provide that level of just like foundational safety and care and nourishment, psychological safety, physical safety, and how, my brain was going, I will tell you this, I always tell people when they're talking to me sometimes and it's something really exciting, like sometimes I'm not looking at them. I'm like, it's just because there's so many ideas from the things you were saying. But like just the thought of what school really brings to people and the opportunity to be in community with people that aren't in the 4 walls of the house you grew up with and aren't necessarily your family. And just the power of what school brings to the table, right? So there's that. And then the part around teachers and like valuing the folks, teachers and anybody really in the education system that's creating those spaces and allowing those spaces to exist and making them flourish. And how, we saw this with all the kind of the protests across the country with teachers in the last couple of years. But, you know, there is definitely this disconnect of how much we value financially in this capitalistic society, the education system, until it's no longer there for us in the way we expect. Or even, you know, and I think so there's a part of me, it's like, yes, can we go virtual on certain things? Yes, there are certain ways we can dial up our virtual classrooms one way or another. But that's one side of the conversation. The other side of the conversation is, should we be reassessing how we value the education system and the education experience, both from the students from, I say K, but pre-K through wherever their end point is in education. I still consider myself a student of life in any way I possibly can. But how we think about, I don't know if it's reevaluating or just like coming back to the meat of the issue around the value and importance of education and creating those spaces. So I said a whole lot of things. What are your thoughts about that?
No, I totally agree with you, Nikki. We should, and I think that, unfortunately, I don't think that this pandemic is really going to help us do that, though, because what I feel is going to happen is I feel that officials who are removed are going to say, oh, look, they still had school. They still, right. And it's like, no, they didn't. Right. Mm-hmm. Like I've checked in with 6 students today, right? It is not the same. But also, school is where you find your advocates, right? School, when I think about my friends who are teachers and counselors and principals, the work goes way beyond the job description. There is so much that young people get from being in an environment where there is at least one caring adult. And not saying that home isn't that place, but for all students, home might not be where you find your best advocates and people who have the patience to take you through some things. We've all been in classrooms, and that it could be English class, and if a discussion comes up, you just learn so much about the world. You make bonds and friendships, and this is essential. This is our social capital, right? These are the people who we can go back to, and who students often come back to once they leave and are in college, because they realize how much time and energy these caring adults have sown into them, and the impact that they're making. I was on my way. I was at Temple University, and I was on my way out, and a young woman was there at a security desk, and I was leaving for the day, so I was like, "Good night," and she says, "Miss Rowe." And so I looked at her, because I don't like to think that I'm old enough to have students who are adults, in the workforce. So I'm like, why are you calling me that, right? And so anyway, she's like, "Oh, I remember you from Germantown. I remember you from Germantown." And she says, "I learned so much." She says, "You all taught me how to dress for a job. We did mock job interviews." She said that I would get on them about having like negative energy. And she's like, you would tell us, like, you got to get your attitude together, right? And so she just said, I learned so much from you all. And even though we were in a public school, I would tell my friends, we got so much there. And again, all of those things she said, they weren't mandates. They weren't in any of our job descriptions. It was just things that we knew, hey, our students will need this, or there's not someone telling them these things, so let's be the ones to do it. So yeah, we cannot discount, and I really hope that we don't have a national narrative about how we can go more virtual when it comes to K-12 education. It takes a certain amount of maturity and development, and young people definitely need guidance. And so, yes, Nikki, I hope that we really reevaluate, we meaning people who can do something about how much educators are actually being paid and compensated for the work. I know that parents for sure will appreciate the role that school and that educators play in their children's lives if they depend on these schools while they're working. And then, I can imagine though that there is another subset of folks who like even students being homeschooled, we often think about one child, solitary in their home at a computer, but there are homeschool communities where parents are getting together. And so even the way that they're educating their children will be impacted with
Right.
social distancing, right? Now you can't go to your neighbor's house, or if there were 9 of them getting together for social studies, they can't
Right.
all meet in one place. So it's a huge disruption. And I think we are going to value each other much more after this than we did prior to.
See, I like that. I like the value. We talked before we got on here. I've already mentioned the hair on fire reaction. We've talked about toilet paper. Like, I feel like the larger discourse about this is all the negative and all of the fear and division, and the racist dynamics that are happening within just the conversations about it on such a high level, and just so much of the negativity around this. And I have a lot of friends that are, I don't even think I said this before we came on. I have a lot of friends that are in kind of this corporate grind that are freaking out about even just being by themselves and not being in their routine, and flipping it on its head and saying, we can do hard things. We're showing we can do hard things. We're going to get more connected, because there's not many things in the world that have us feeling as though we are one human race in the way that this is making us feel like we are one human race. And, I was actually, I'm in the middle of locking down a contract right now. And obviously everything gets shifted in this, but I'm talking diversity and inclusion for this. And so, of course, I'm like, this is a perfect time for me to make a plug about how important inclusion is, not about my business, but about the fact that, yes, your whole business is freaking out about this, but isn't this such a beautiful example we can use when everything's in a spot where we can have a conversation in a room together? Because it really is, none of the things that divide us at such a identity bucket-based level really matter when you get to, the coronavirus one, but really the viability and the value of your life on a daily basis. We have all these things that make us think that, but we have something like a virus that can show us, whether we want to be blind to it or not, we can't, that we are vulnerable human beings across the board.
That's it. And it doesn't matter what social boundaries we put up. There is not a country line. There are no lines, no boundaries, no walls, right? That's going to protect anybody from this coronavirus. And I think it's good that we see, and we've been needing a shaking up a long time ago, but seriously, and just to think about how the time that we got to spend together in New York, we can't even, there's no way we can even predict when we would be able to be back to such what we call normalcy, right? Or just a sheer number of people and to take in the subway and all of those things. So we know that our lives and the way we think about one another, just human to human, is going to shift. And I always like to think forward to what's the positive. And I think that you just brought up one of the biggest positives is that, hey, diversity and inclusion, this should teach us so much about our falsehoods and the way that we had been perceiving one another and people's value based on their gender identity or any of those things, right? And so, there's no space for that at all.
Yep, especially when you're socially isolated in a very space with yourself. There's no space for any of that. So here's a question that I have. Well, I know this is like Nikki fangirl right now. I know you mentioned when we were together in New York that you're thinking about, or you've been working on, I shouldn't even say thinking about, writing a book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have been doing the work of Capture Greatness for 6 years now. And in the 6 years, I've had the pleasure of working with so many students every year. And so some of the students that I'm helping are, they come from some of the highest need families. Some of them are coming from families and households that the government is saying, they can afford to contribute $10,000, $14,000 a year to their college education. And so in this work, I've been tasked with figuring out how do I get all of my students to school. And because every year we're going up against some really tough scholarships. So we have like 4 students who got the Gates Millennium Scholarship. So it's like, okay, right, that's 8 essays. My earphones just fell off, but that's okay. That's 8 essays that they had to write for that. But then they also had to be like really, really great students, and we've helped students get internal scholarships. Those are scholarships that's coming from other colleges and universities. So like right now I have one of my students, she got the highest merit award for a really expensive polytech school.
Hey.
Right. And so it's like, it's great to see that, but we know now that a lot of the college coaching really comes into that. And so a student can't just get that by doing their best in junior or senior year. You have to build your students up towards that. So, and of course, prior to that, I was already a college coordinator.
Right.
So putting together my years of experience with coaching students through how to get into some of the most competitive colleges in the country, and also helping students navigate the scholarship landscape, since everyone, if some scholarships are simply for students who have financial need based on the government's formula, some scholarships are merit based on and on. So anyhow, the book is a book that is designed based on a seminar that I hold for parents. And so right now, Capture Greatness primarily works with schools and organizations. And so we run scholarship clubs at the school or organization site and works with the students in that capacity. There has been a nagging at my spirit though around, because ultimately it's still the cost of college lies with the student and the families. And I say, the more parents understand about how to actually get scholarship success for their children, the better we'll be. And the conversation for parents really needs to happen in middle school so that they're optimizing every point of high school. Right. And so I am about a third of the way through. The outline for the book is like 17 pages. Yeah, it's crazy. I know, that's the outline. And I was like, okay. And so
it's a trilogy. It'll be a trilogy.
So right now I have up to chapter 4 drafted, and I'm actually going to take parents through the entire process that I'm taking students through as they work with us from freshman year through senior year, and then even helping parents understand where do you find money once your child is in college, becomes a college student, because there is a lot of money out there for students, but often you have to make some tough decisions. So one particular strategy could be, depending on the funding at a college or university, if you have a child who, let's say, wants to be a nurse, but there's funding for biology, send them through the biology program. They can still become a nurse with the biology. And so, so just really thinking about how to be strategic. I also predict though that since we're going through this pandemic, and because we're not ready, right? That there's going to be much more funding for STEM and for research. So when we look at anything that happens on a global level, there are going to be more young people who will live through this pandemic and who will want to come up with some type of solution for things like this. And so and then of course there are going to be philanthropists and folks who are going to come into wealth later in life, who are going to remember this, or who are going to lose someone unfortunately, but in a very unnecessary way. We should not be this worried about a flu, right? And so we didn't think that we would see it in our lifetimes. We thought that things like this were behind us. But being a part of history as it unfolds will definitely have more people paying more attention to this. And like you said, right, not being so blinded and short-sighted and thinking that something is only someone's issue, over there, and that it's not here. So I think that we're going to see money that's going to go towards helping people address social ills and challenges like this. And so that's something else to think about.
Well, and your book will come out at the perfect time because, I heard you say there's a lot of money out there. And, I think a lot of times, I'll even just reflect this back as an entrepreneur, that people always talk about there's all this grant money and there's all this funding and there's all this, that, and the other thing. Why aren't you getting it? It's like, I don't know where it is, or I don't have access to it, or nobody, I don't know about it until the deadline's gone, or I don't know about it until it's, or maybe it doesn't, or I don't think even more so. I mean, I'm like pulling up all the women's leadership stuff in my brain, but like, I don't think I'm qualified for it, or I didn't think it related to me, or all those things that are all these individual experiences as we're hearing things that we're not familiar with, because we didn't necessarily have the seeds planted. I think, as an entrepreneur, I even went to a school that was focused on business for my undergrad. And in my career, I was all in business, in management consulting spaces, and in investment management where they're investing in companies. Like, I was surrounded by all of this stuff, and I still never got the baseline foundational kind of seed level education of understanding where these opportunities are for you if you are trying to do this yourself, or if you're trying to navigate that landscape. So I hear so much of that experience coming through in what your book will be able to offer parents, one, but I think there is a part of this that it trickles down to their kids. And it also then, I need to find a new word for kind of contagious and infectious right now, because I love those two words and they just feel wrong. But then you catch on. It catches on for the folks around you, and you can now be an advocate or a resource for someone around you that's still feeling that, like, I don't even know where to look, because you're going to be creating this incredible community. And I always think of, like, you're going to be creating this like troop of people that now have information that they could have come through your workshops. They could have, got your book. They just know and hopefully hear about you through this podcast, and can support what you're doing and be a part of that kind of generational change that we need to have around how we value education, how we think of education, how we get access to education, and how we can, at the end of the day, kind of change the rules to what we need right now, so people are actually getting the things that they need.
Absolutely. And so that's what the book will do. We'll tell parents where to look for dollars specific for your child, how to prep your child so that they can access dollars across multiple areas. I've identified like 14 different segments of scholarships that most folks don't know exist.
And I just got whiplash from that number.
Yeah,
I just like, what?
So most folks will say, oh, it's like 3 different sources. And actually there's so much more. But then also I want to say too, when I talk about scholarships in the work that I do with Capture Greatness, we make an assumption that every student who goes to college will finish. And I just want people to understand that right now we're looking at the U.S., right, having citizens holding over $1 trillion in student loan debt. But a third of that, or more than $3 billion, is actually held by people who started the degree but weren't able to finish. And so research shows that most folks who abandon their degree just could not, they either had to work too many hours and couldn't still be in good standing as a student, or just the cost of trying to get to the finish line was too much.
Yeah.
And so when we further do research, it looks like there are people who are paying back thousands of dollars in student loan debt. As a matter of fact, I have a student, she started school, she earned over $17,000 in external scholarship that she
Right.
took with her to the college. And in her second semester of her freshman year, they told her that she had an $1,800 gap. And this young lady had no way of closing $1,800, right? And
Oh,
so immediately the school they froze her transcripts. So as soon as she realized that she would not have $1,800
at 18 years old.
at 18 years old,
Right.
right? And she had recently been kind of estranged from her parents, so she doesn't have family support. She works part-time in addition to the scholarship dollars that she was able to bring in. But $1,800, her transcript was frozen. And so she called me and she said, well, I can't get my transcripts, which means I can't transfer to a school
Mm.
that's more economically feasible. So do I just stop and apply all over and start all over as a freshman? Now she has a 3.5 GPA, and
Oh,
so it's like, no. And so we had to write some appeal letters to some of the scholarship organizations that already funded her. And thankfully, one of the organizations closed her gap. So now she can finish out her semester. She's already applied to transfer somewhere, but that was a lesson she learned really early on. And so I just want parents to even understand that even if you think that you have it, or, oh, my child is getting full tuition scholarship,
right.
there are so many costs associated with college that it should be a practice that we are actually, if we are, I say this all the time, if you intend for your child or for your students to go to college, more than college prep, it should be scholarship prep, because we know we can get a student into some college or university in the country. Scholarships are more competitive than college admission,
Mm.
right? For many of the colleges or universities. So if you plan on sending children to college, then you must prioritize helping them find the funding for it, because that's the difference between getting a degree and not. And for some people, they are in thousands of dollars of debt and they only owe the institution $500, but
Right.
couldn't come up with it, right? So yeah.
Oof. Well, then, I mean, even more reason for us to reassess all that's going on around it, right? Because it is. We talk about tuition as the holy grail of it all, but we talk scholarship. We also talk, I mean, there's no financial education. You don't learn how to budget. You don't learn how to balance budgets. You don't learn how to, there's so many things that, again, those seeds that would be so helpful to be planted early, both within the students and the parents and just society in general's approach to this stuff. So it's not a reactive, oh my goodness, I'm always waiting. I need to figure out how I can pay back the thing I wasn't even expecting to have to pay.
Right.
Yeah. Because nobody, again, when you're operating from a defensive or from your back foot, it's a really difficult place to be doing anything expansive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, okay. So we had such a good conversation. I'm kind of bummed that well, here's the thing. We'll have to have another conversation when the book slash, I don't know. I'm feeling like more than one book in my body right now for you. But when that's here, like I will definitely share with the Checkbox other audience. But I feel like, I just want to talk to you always. So the last thing I want to ask is, if people want to learn more about you, support you, work with you in any way, shape, or form, how do they go about doing that?
So I would love to see you all on the Capture Greatness newsletter list. So you can access that at capturegreatness.org. Right now, if you sign up, there's actually a giveaway around scholarships. And so anybody working with young people, if you want to understand better how to prepare a student for scholarship success, that's right there as a thank you for joining us on this journey. And if you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is the best place to do that. And so on LinkedIn, I'm Melissa A. Rowe, MED. I think there's a lot of Melissas. There are multiple Melissa Rowes. So I think it's Melissa A. Rowe, MED on LinkedIn. And that's where I'm most active. I don't
Perfect.
do a lot of tweeting or anything.
Well, that's good. We will, and just listeners, all this will be on the show notes for you to take a look at. But do yourself a favor, go connect with Melissa now, get on that newsletter, get that giveaway. It's amazing. I'm just excited. I'm excited for all of you to know Melissa more because I am just so grateful for her, for the world bringing us together. So Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for sharing your story and for just everything that you're doing in the world right now. I feel like you just made me sit up a little bit taller, made me come. I feel like the woman that Miss Rowe. It's like, yeah, thank you. Thank you for a little bit of that.
Don't even do that. But thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me to share with your audience. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm just so excited for what's to come for both of us.
Ooh, onward, my friend. I feel like we'll have to do a celebration, post-coronavirus celebration. Everyone's welcome. Let's just have a good time. All right. Well, thank you for joining.
All right, Nikki. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.